welcome to this week's episode of Tips and Tea. This is the final episode in our Change series, and this week we are drinking holiday tea in a Krispy Kreme mug because we are going to be talking about habits. We think we're in control of ourselves at all times, but researchers actually tell us that about 40% of our behavior is completely controlled by habits. So we're not even thinking about it. And the reason we have such well-ingrained habits is our brains are always trying to make life easy for us. Because you see, learning new things actually takes a lot of effort and a lot of energy. So anything they can turn into a habit, anything they can have us routinely do, saves us energy, and it's much, much more efficient. So in order to understand this, maybe think about puppies or young children. When they run around taking in the world through all of their senses, they have no habits, they have absolutely no set patterns of behavior, and they'll go run, 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 and they'll be completely out because they're exhausted. Because keeping doing new things all the time is exhausting. That's why we have habits. We classify habits as being good habits or bad habits, and the good ones take us to where we want to go, and the bad ones take us further away from where we want to go. But actually, sometimes it's not the habit that takes us off track. Sometimes it's the unintended consequence, which happens as a result of the habit, that gets us out of our groove. Charles Duhigg wrote an absolutely fabulous book about habits. It's called Habits. And in it, he explains that there are three components to any habit. First of all, there's a cue or a trigger, which sets us off into some behaviors or a routine. And then there's a reward at the other end. So, taking my donut example, I see a box of donuts on the counter at work. I lift the lid and immediately go in and grab the donut and stick it in my mouth. And there it is, the reward, the delicious taste of donut that seeps into every pore of my body and makes my whole existence worthwhile for at least a minute. But of course, that habit has some unintended consequences. So not being able to button up my jeans or get into my favorite outfits is an unintended consequence of my donut habit. And that's how some of these habits get their bad reputation. It's not so much the thing itself that is bad, it's what happens as a result of the habit that we don't like. The way that habits work is that after a while, they become completely invisible to us. Just remember, cast your minds back to when you learned to drive. You had all of those difficult tasks that you had to learn to do all at once. So you had to be able to steer, and you had to be able to look in the windshield and in all of the mirrors all at once, and you had to change gear, and you had to do the whole foot pedal thing with the accelerator and the brake, and maybe even a clutch. And you had to do it all at once, and it was terrifying. But now when you get in a car, you just literally open the door, you strap on your seatbelt, and off you go. You don't think about any of those things at all. And that's because driving for you has become a habit. Driving for me had become a habit when I reached the States 20 years ago. I'd already been driving for about 10 years, and so it was habitual every morning that I would just put the car in reverse, I would get onto the road, and I would start driving on the left-hand side of the road, which in America is a bit tricky because everybody drives on the right. And it would only be when I actually came across some oncoming traffic coming the other way, I would realize I was on the wrong lane because I was on autopilot. I was driving habitually. And it actually took me quite a long time to reverse out of the drive in the morning and get on the right side of the road in order to start my day really well. So back to the three components of habits: the cues, the routines, and the rewards. So if we want to change or break a habit, what we need to do is to alter the cue or the routine. So back to our donut example. Every Monday, in the place that you work, a box of donuts comes in and it appears on one of the counters. near where you work. That is the cue. It's a Monday and there's a box of donuts there. And your routine is that you just go and pick up a donut and eat it without even thinking about it. So what could you do differently with the cue? Could you be somewhere else on a Monday morning? Could you actually occupy yourself in another part of the building so that you weren't lured to the cue? And what about the routine? If you happen to be in the proximity of the box, could you do anything else other than lift the lid and put your hand in it? Could you turn around and go talk to somebody else? Could you sing a little song? Could you jog around the box instead of eat one of the donuts? So when we start thinking about the cues and the routines that we go through, we can really be quite creative as to how we can change our habits. And trying to make new habits is also a similar process. So in the early part of the year, lots of people want to exercise more. And the really best way to exercise is to just make it a habitual part of your life. So early morning people will tell you that one of the habits that they have is to jump out of bed, immediately bump into their running shoes or into their gym kit, and immediately it sets off a cycle or a routine of getting up, going for a run, getting into the gym, which gives them a reward of feeling great and being able to fit into their jeans. Now, if we're trying to establish a habit such as exercise, Charles Duhigg says really go overboard on the reward after you've completed the habit successfully. So he even suggests after you get out of bed, you get your running stuff on, you go for a run, you come back in, give yourself a little piece of chocolate. And that might seem very counterintuitive because I've just done exercise because I want to maintain my girlish figure. And so having a little bit of chocolate may seem wrong. But what he says is go overboard on the reward at the beginning of the habit. As you get further into the habit, as you get 30 or 60 days in, you won't need that chocolate at all. The habit in itself will become its own intrinsic reward. But at the beginning, if you're trying to start a new habit, really focus in on a reward that's meaningful to you. And so my tip for you this week is to really think about your habits and actually do a bit of a traffic light survey. So which habits do you want to start? Which habits do you want to stop? Which habits do you want to continue? And if you want to stop any, then really think about the cues and the routines. And if you want to start setting up some cues, routines, and really focus in on the reward. So that's habits. It brings us to the end in our 4-part series on change. The other parts in this series have been about resolutions and change and transitions. So now would be a great time to go catch up on those. And we'll see you next time.